Hey, it's been a while. I'm Claude,
And I'm Edson, and you're listening to FamTalks.
where we talk about faith through apologetics and share it with you as a ministry. We hope to encourage families to talk about big questions on faith, to counter the worldview from a word view.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's why today we have an interesting comeback question. And that question would be, how do we respond to premarital sex? So if you find this question interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell that you will be notified for whenever we upload.
I think this is an important question, my son, because this is something that the culture is talking about, that it's something that it's okay. But as Christians, like how do we also respond to it? So I think it's good to dig deep into how the world sees it and how do we see it from a biblical perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, well, I'm not sure, but from what I can glean, right, there's a lot of media that would kind of not explicitly say that premarital sex is fine, but it would show that kind of instances, especially in movies, especially in other instances where people are having sex before they get married. There are even mentions of friends with benefits, wherein these are people that you have sex with and with no plans whatsoever with getting married. I think there's also no romance involved, no romantic attraction between each other. It's just purely sexual attraction, and that's what they get out of it, right? And for the biblical perspective, would you like to touch on that, Mom?
Well, in the context of the biblical perspective when it comes to sex, premarital sex, it's a no. Why? Sex in its biblical context was designed to be holy, and it's designed to be shared with the husband and wife. That's the design of sex. It shouldn't be outside of marriage because there are certain consequences if we do that. So based on what you just said, I cannot imagine having friends with benefits or having sex purely out of biological biological urges. There's something special about it when it's done in the context of marriage. So I think it's good to look at it from how the world sees it right now. Like it's like what you said, it's highly encouraged, right? But what's the impact of actually encouraging premarital sex or being open to it,
Yeah,
right?
and definitely. Again, before we answer that question, I think that it's also important to touch upon the fact that since God had designed marriage between husband and wife, this is to unify these two people, right?
Mhm.
And when you unify these people, the kind of baggages that a person has spiritually, the spiritual baggages that they have, kinds of get shared. In a sense, it gets shared with one another since they have unified in spirit. And if you are just, I guess, engaging in sexual activities with a lot of different people, the kind of spiritual baggages that they are carrying, either their own or perhaps from other people as well, these spiritual baggages get passed on to you.
Mm.
And at some point, it's definitely going to be hard. It's going to be heavy because you are carrying these kinds of baggages that aren't aren't yours to begin with. And well, there's obviously the act of defying what God had made for man, the act of defying the Jew design of what God has made for marriage and sex. And defying this means that we are, or the point I'm trying to drive is that when we are straying from God's initial design, then we are not following the kind of purpose or how it was meant to be, right? And engaging in sex purely for lust, without marriage, it's um, I guess the point I'm trying to say is that it's not how it was designed. It's not natural. It's not how life should be. And I'm sure that there are a lot of counters to that. Like, it feels good. I feel right this way. I feel validated this way. And yes, that may be true, but that kind of validation that you're looking for, that kind of feeling of being accepted for who you are, I think all of that would be stemming from the kind of identity that you have, the kind of a weak identity that a person has, which I believe we've already talked about that in a previous video, so we don't need to touch much upon that. So going into the kind of world perspective on what premarital sex is, that it's something that you experiment with. I think that's um something that I hear mostly about, that it's something that you should just try, especially for me as a man, as a male. Like, there's nothing to lose, there's nothing for me to, there's nothing lost, right? And I don't agree with that because, well, first and foremost, I'm going to lose my virginity, which is something that would be best saved for after marriage, right? And Um, for me, I feel like sex, if it's outside of marriage, something that would be involving something romantic. I cannot, uh, I cannot imagine sex as something purely lustful. I find it hard to imagine that. So, sex outside of marriage, even if you are, what do you call this? Even if there is some kind of romance involved, some kind of love involved, I would, I personally believe that you don't love that person enough to wait for after your wedding day. So for me, it's counterintuitive to, even if there's love involved, to have sex before marriage because you're just impatient. You're not willing to wait. Even if the romantic partner wants it, I still think that both of you deserve that. Both of us, if it's me, both of us does or does deserve the kind of respect for each other's body that we should both be willing to wait. And I hope that whoever I find a romantic relationship with in the future would kind of share that same kind of ideas.
Or
Yeah. So
values.
any anything to add to that?
Well, this morning in my Bible reading in First Corinthians, I love that it highlights that marriage is actually a calling. You know, Paul emphasized that being married is a calling in the same way that being single is a calling.
Mm-hmm.
And in through the word uh commentary, I love through the word. So this morning, the pastor was sharing about a little boy asking his grandfather, like, why is it during your time there were less STDs or there were no problems on such things as this and that? What did you do to have safe sex? And I love the answer of the grandfather. A marriage ring, a ring, you know, because I think that that seals the deal. Sex done during marriage has God's blessing. Therefore, you protect yourself from unwanted pregnancy. You protect yourself from possible STDs and all of the different sicknesses that you could get. And number three, you've already mentioned it, my son, possible emotional bandages because you become one, right? And in that sense, I think how the world is now encouraging the youth, like what you said, to explore it, is now actually slowly penetrating the education with the intent of having comprehensive sexuality education being implemented in schools. And there's a current ongoing bill that's happening about it. So if we're going to look at it now, previously this is just being discussed or being subtly uh the messaging in terms of being subtle is being seen in cartoons or movies, or some of the other things that we're exposed to, internet, social media. But now, slowly, people wanted it to be part of the education, where students, even at a young age, the youth, are now being educated on exploration. And that's something that I think the importance of discussing these things, like what we're doing in the family context. What are the values that you have as a family? Is this something that you would agree with or not? Because even if the world dictates all of these things, or even if in the school setting, things like this will be discussed, but if in the family context, you know what you believe in and you hold on to the biblical standards, then I think our children and future generation will be guided accordingly, right?
Mhm.
But if we let the culture or even the social media educate us about it, and now slowly it's penetrating the educational system, which I am strongly, strongly against, then the role of the parents should be very, very critical in instilling the right values when it comes to sex in itself. Sex is designed within the context of marriage. It was not designed outside of marriage. So you get to reap the harvest, I would say, of enjoying sex only with the blessing of the Lord.
Yeah, and I think something that I just really wanted to highlight from what you said, Matt, is the importance of parents, right? That the are the kind of role model that parents play to their children, especially regarding sex and regarding sexual education. Right? It's very important that our parents are very involved, right? And at the same time, something that my victory group leader had shared with us when we were discussing love. It was about love. It's don't awaken love, right? If it's not the right time, right? So for me, as a student, now's not necessarily the best time to pursue and awaken love because I still need to focus on my studies. I still need to make sure that I am going to graduate on time and that everything's on track, right? So in the same way, don't awaken these kinds of sexual desires if it's not the right time, especially towards young children who probably never even knew about this. Yes, there would come a time when puberty comes, but before that, I don't think that there is any need to expose them to very phallic imagery, very expose them to these kinds of things, right? So, as the role of parents, whether your children are exposed to these or not, right? I think that as the parents, you have the kind of say you are able to determine when is the right time to have these kinds of talks with your children. And having these talks, I would say, is very, very important because if you don't, then it's going to be the world who teaches your children about these things. For us in the Philippines, as Mom had mentioned, there's a bill that's trying to be pushed to get passed to integrate these kinds of um, comprehensive sexual education throughout, I believe, all grade levels. And there are times where that may be good, but overall, it seems like the side effects of having children exposed to these at such an early age is much worse than preparing them against or to prevent uh, teenage pregnancies, which is the aim of the bill. So I think just to cap off my personal thoughts, it's that um, don't awaken what do you call this? Don't awaken these kinds of desires if it's not with the time. And as parents, I believe that you play a very, very important role in the development of your children. So it is your prerogative, it is your call when to have these kinds of conversations with your own children and families.
Agree. Definitely agree. And I think there would still be more in terms of how the culture would continually educate our children. So we have
Mm-hmm.
to be continually adapt with what's happening with the world and discuss that with our children. Because if we
Mm-hmm.
don't, then definitely they'll be able to catch all of these things. And they would now embrace these beliefs and values, which may not be aligned to your values. So setting that time just to talk to your kids about certain things like this is really, really important. And I know it's not easy because personally, growing up in a conservative family, I don't think that was something that we discussed. I never talk about it with my parents. So in a way, like I love that we get to talk about this, my son, you at a certain age. But I know that the first time we had that conversation was when you were in grade 5, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very interesting conversation that we were able to just talk about things. And there were also two things that I believe that help you in terms of relationships, right? That if you are to pursue a girl, like as a guy, that's your job. It's your job to pursue a girl. And I love that conversation. And if you will be in a relationship, make sure that you have the intent to marry that girl. Otherwise, you're wasting her time. You're wasting her time. So, relationships are meant as a preparation for marriage, right? And I love that you said it's not a stage to explore or awaken sexual desires or lustful desires, but it's a way to get to know the person in preparation for marriage. And within marriage, God's blessing will overflow, and that includes physical intimacy. So praise God. Thank you, my son, for our conversation today. I missed this. I hope our viewers also missed it, but it's just nice to talk about things like this with you.
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely great to be able to get back to the kind of flow and items that we can now end our video. So thank you so much for listening and a happy new year because this is my first video back from after taking quite a long break. I think it's about 2 months. So once again, thank you so much for listening and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye for now.